would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. And like I said, we will get into this Brexit, Britain leaving the EU. And, you know, there's going to be retaliation against the Great Britain for leaving the EU. You can bet on that. And there's already, in a way, a panic going on within the EU to try to basically institute something to keep other countries from leaving the EU, either to satisfy a couple of the concerns other countries may have, or just making it where it will be extremely difficult, and some of that might also come in the form of how they retaliate against Great Britain, because you better believe that they're not going, okay, you want to leave our EU, okay, you know, that's your choice. We were hoping you would stay. No, you're not going to get that from the EU, because Britain leaving the EU and the signaling of other countries ready to leave the EU, they're not going to be happy about it. This is a long, drawn out process that they've been going through to create the EU. And many of you already know that, you know, lots of the inner workings of the EU were thought up at a secretive meeting called Bilderberg, which it's been outlined multiple times. And remember, too, that most of these countries never got to, you know, vote to become part of the EU. They just kind of became part of the EU treaties. Yeah. So now that Britain is leaving, you know, the EU, supposedly, I've already seen they're trying to get petitions out there for a second referendum so they can try to stay in. Well, hold on. No, you already had your vote. This is a case of the globalists, which you'll see this from almost every globalist progressive establishment within every country, that, you know, when they don't get their way, it's not like, well, we'll try again eventually. No, it's like, oh, no, we should just revote and revote and revote until we get the results we like. Um, I'm sure there's a lot of Ron Paul supporters that would like to have got a chance to maybe get real results. Um, but see, that the thing about the whole Britain leaving is they really expected to get the vote to stay. They really were that arrogant about the EU because most of these people are people that never actually have to pay the consequences for the policies that they have allowed to happen by staying a part of the EU, whether they're blackmailed into going along with it or they actually believe in it. When we see how the establishment has been working, they have been completely disengaged with the reality of the situation, definitely with the immigration situation over in Europe. And there are some articles that will cover that whole immigration with Britain leaving the EU, that kind of makes you wonder a little bit. But again, it'll be part of that retaliation or, a way to force the hand of Britain, which I hope it doesn't work. I would call their bluff, and if they aren't bluffing, then I would call them, what they are, which the establishment, oh, you left the EU and you don't want to do what we like to do, therefore okay, keep being a child. Immature, narcissistic type people. And I've seen one article already talk about if Britain doesn't continue to allow the immigration policy that the EU is operating off of, I think it might even came from Merkel, that Britain wouldn't be allowed to have free trade with the EU countries. We're going to start off with the Ron Paul Liberty Report, Brexit, Truth and Consequences, and then no way I would be able to cover all the Brexit articles without doing it in like 3 broadcasts. So we will cover quite a bit, though, after Ron Paul Liberty Report, and then I also have a second Ron Paul Liberty Report still on the Brexit. But let's get into this one, Brexit, Truth and Consequences, and then we'll cover some articles.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Guess what? We're still talking about Brexit. And the whole country is, the whole world is still talking about Brexit because it is a big issue. And we'll try to sort some of this out on this. I imagine you've been watching the news. Any comments that you'd like to make?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's an earthquake in the political world. The magnitude is enormous. However, the changes that people might expect to see overnight, they may not see overnight, and that may produce some results that are unexpected.
Yeah, and the whole thing is there's going to be a lot of blame game going on here now. There's going to be chaos in the markets and political chaos and civil chaos. It'll all be because of Brexit and that particular vote. But that's sort of like, I think, missing the point. A lot of times when there's a stock market bubble, nobody says that, and then there's a crash, they want to say, who caused the crash? Who were the bad guys? Somebody caused the crash. but it was something that preceded it that guaranteed there would be a crash, whether it's in the stock market or in the economy. When something is unstable, it comes apart. It comes apart for different reasons. And I think the European Union was always unstable. It didn't make sense from the very beginning, and yet they've patched it together. They, conned people into believing about it for political and economic reasons, and there were some things that on the surface looked better for the people, because there are some good arguments for having easier travel and easier trade, even though it was a much bigger deal than just opening up trade and communications. It was a movement toward a new world order, big government, globalism. And when that's developed in the free market and it's voluntary, it's fine and dandy. But when it's used by force and pushing people into it, and the people don't have much say, like they didn't have any say in Brussels writing laws against the British people, it's very unstable. And then it invites people to come in and look for power and control. So the financial people get control, whether it's the banks or corporations or the special political interests, and then you end up with some of the military interests involved. But when that happens, I think it's destined to fall apart. And that's the way I've looked at generally our economy, not only organizations like the European Union, but the world economy is patched together with dollar hegemony, the paper dollar, the fiat system. And yes, it can work for a while, and it can be patched over for a long time, but eventually it's very unstable. So this is part of the instability that exists in the financial and economic markets, and I believe that this dramatic result here isn't an explanation done by just saying, well, Brexit did it. If they didn't have the vote, it would all be okay. No, it was going to happen anyway. And now I think it's up to us to sort out what's going to happen? What's the law say? When is this going to come about? And we've talked about it. We know that, the referendum was not binding. They have a lot of things to do. It could go on for years. But the other side of it, what is the political message? It is said, and to a degree I believe this, that the government that people have is a reflection of the people's will. Even the bad governments, they're tolerated for a while and they put up with them. And right now, I think the message is loud and clear, regardless of whether they roadblock and they don't go through with this, and it takes 5 or 10 years to settle all the agreements. I mean, it proves they shouldn't have made so many agreements. Stuff should be voluntary. But I think there's something very much locked in place, that it wasn't going to work. It's not going to work. The big question is what does that lead to? How much violence and how much economic chaos? And when will they realize that big government isn't the answer to these problems?
Yeah. You could almost trace the inevitable beginning of the end back to, say, 92 in the Maastricht Treaty, where you had a customs union of sovereign states, now starting to move into becoming a political union with a unified government. That government happened to be a non-elected government, or certainly not directly elected by the people. As you tightened and deepened this political integration, you left the people behind. And you saw so many times there were votes in EU countries, and the people voted the wrong way, and so they redid it. And they kept redoing it. Ireland was one example. They would keep redoing it until they got the right response. And I think that that irritated people, and it has caused more people to go to the side of going back to some national sovereignty and away from the centralized government.
Yeah, I think the sovereignty issue is the big issue. Because I don't think the British are libertarians and they want to get rid of the EU because they're too much interventionist. But they resented the fact that these unelected officials were writing laws and rules, and then they have a court system. And if the court rules right, there's no appeal. And it's an unelected court, and they're obligated to live under these laws. Just like we're having a grower obligation to live under UN resolutions. We go to war with UN resolutions and NATO. And I don't think the people have awakened in this country either to how much sovereignty that we have lost. When the EU was being put together, it made no sense to me. I said, it's good to have voluntary assimilation and get together and trade and have a sound currency. But this whole thing of assuming, especially an unelected group of special interest politicians getting together and saying that what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have policies that will satisfy the Spanish, the Italians, the Greeks, the British, the French, and the Germans. History tells us that there's a little bit of nationalism that exists, and you just can't wipe that away. And I think in a libertarian society, there's no reason culturally this is all permissible. If all the associations, economic and social, are voluntary, you can still have your cultural independence. But in a way, this is coming to a climax because of our policies, and the British especially, because they work with us. We've been involved in the Middle East. We export central banking and IRS taxation, and we export Keynesian economics. At the same time, we export war. We go over there and disrupt countries. So we have a lot of responsibility for the migration that has occurred. And then the people are required to pay for it. It's a burden. In a libertarian society, people can come and go, but they're on their own. They don't get forced to pay for it. So if people come in this country, you get good benefits. That means you and I have to pay the taxes to take care of these people who get in front of the line and come in for political reasons and who knows what. That is a setting just for mischief. And then when you think about a fragile economic system and a fragile social system, it's bound to break apart, and that is what we're seeing. So I think the de facto business is much more important than the de jure. The de jure, the law, when things like this come about, it doesn't matter. I think the Fed is going to end. But I don't expect Congress to all of a sudden someday, start listening to us and say, oh, yeah, well, let's pass this law and repeal the Federal Reserve Act. That's not going to happen. But it can end because it's not viable. And no matter what they do with their plunge protection team and all this secret stuff and QEs, it can't work. The question is how does it come apart? When does it come apart? And who's going to suffer the most?
Yeah, and I was on radio the day after the vote, and I said that this reminds me of 1989. This is a 1989 for this generation. And if you think back of 1989 and the end of communism, it started in such a very simple way. It was simply East German holidaymakers in Hungary on Lake Balaton who decided not to leave and were allowed to go through the Austrian border as they had not been allowed to do in the first place. It was such a small, insignificant looking thing, but it started a tidal wave that ended up in the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I think one of the things you're seeing in the UK, you see Boris Johnson took a big risk and came out on the side of leaving, and now he looks to be the ascendant potential prime minister. He's pretty moderate in this whole thing. He says there's no rush, we're not going to trigger the Article 50 to leave yet. I think what happened, if you look back in Eastern Europe in '89, a lot of the more moderate politicians who couldn't foresee a total crumbling of communism were very quickly overtaken by events. And so I think you could see something like this, somewhat minor event like a vote, could have such huge implications for the future.
Now, Gorbachev was in charge of the Soviet system. He more or less allowed it. He didn't fight it. He didn't send in the tanks. But and some, of course, the real hawks in Russia was very disturbed because he should have, cracked down on them and all. But I think the die was cast. The time had come. Yeah. It was a failed system, and I use that same analogy for the system that we have. The interventionist system, the Keynesian type economics, the fiat money system, the controls that have been placed on the people. But as long as there's big business special interests still making big bucks and other people at the other end of the spectrum getting their welfare checks and different things, it works for a while. When it ends is when the debt is uncontrollable. Now, nobody has to pay interest anymore. You can borrow money and buy stocks, but it comes to an end. And I think that's what we're seeing here when the stock market is down sharply, and I think it's going to be down for a long time. But I don't think this is a consequence of the inevitability of this whole system falling apart. And I've dated this is my personal opinion, from the year 2000 with the NASDAQ bubble. And that was a big deal. And I don't think we've had real economic growth since then. We've had very meager growth since the Bretton Woods broke down and got rid of the gold standard. But back in the 90s, the saying was, invest in anything and hold on, and the brokers were making a ton of money and the stocks kept going up. But if anybody had been talked into buying the NASDAQ in the year 2000, it was around 5,000. What's down more than 10% right now. It's down 10% nominally. So if you take into inflation, so if you bought in the year 2000, 16 years later, your nest egg would be very much smaller. And today, even smaller than that, all the stock people are losing a lot of money. Even some rich people are losing money. When the 1% who have been ripping us off and living on that free interest rate and making all that money with the military-industrial complex, I don't mind it if they lose money. But unfortunately, the masses of middle-class people who made a little bit of effort to take care of themselves and assume responsibility, they are going to suffer. So this is going to be a mess, I think, before it's all over. But the only thing I believe that can help this out is to present an alternative. What do we? Well, that's fine, Ron. You describe the problem, but you never tell us what we do. So they say, yeah, what are we going to do? Well, my slogan is try liberty for a change. That might be a lot better than depending on government and printing press money. That hasn't worked and won't work.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, the first thing you would see is blaming all of the problems now on this vote. And you mentioned a little bit about the financial problems. The markets, at least when we checked before we started the show, the markets are down. You look anywhere, it's because of the vote. It's because of the vote, the markets are down, as if all of a sudden this thing happened. I was going to ask what you thought about that.
Well, it's understandable, especially if the system is friable. It's sort of looking at a house whose foundation was shaky. It was never built right. And they kept building this house higher and higher. And then a storm comes along. And instead of having a sturdy house that would withstand a storm, you have a fragile house, and a small storm comes along and blows it down. Well, what they're saying, well, it's all because there was a wind. It was all because there was rough sailing. There had to be a turn. The whole thing crashes. Well, the crash comes because of the instability, the malinvestment, the too much debt. I think if you had one thing that you could hone in on to symbolize the fragility of the whole system would be debt. Debt, according to the Keynesians, is good because that's how you print money. Debt backs up your currency. You have more treasury bills, you can print more paper money, and that's going to solve all the problem. But debt ultimately has to be paid off. And even though it doesn't get paid off directly, governments never earn money and pay debt off. They pay it off with more bad money. They default on the currency. So that is there. But the fact that the market went down under these conditions merely means that it was supposed to go down and would have gone down. It's not a mild fluctuation of the stock market. It was significant and will be significant. But this is where the money's been going. They print all this money and they give it to their friends in the financial industries, and they have buyback agreements, and their stocks go up, and they make more profits, and the companies coming together and finance these mergers. But it's not a business decision. So that's why everything is fragile. And when you get into these systems in foreign policy, whether it's NATO or whatever, NATO doing these exercises, the great brilliance of having exercises on Russia's border. Yeah, we would really like to have the Russians doing exercises on the Mexico border. So it makes no sense whatsoever as far as I'm concerned.
And this is one realm we haven't really discussed yet on the show, and that is the implications for NATO and also the neocon reaction, because the neocons, I think, are split on the whole Brexit thing. On one hand, those who want a very close relation with the U.S., our special relations between the U.S. and the U.K., they may be for that because they may feel that tightens it. The U.K. is the strongest military in Europe. They spend 2% of their GDP on the military, about half of what we spend, but it's still a heck of a lot more than the rest of Europe does. But on the other hand, there's a lot of fear among the military industrial types and the neocons that with the UK out of the EU militarily, there'll be less, for example, strength on Russia sanctions. The UK has been closest to the US in pushing for sanctions. The rest of the EU countries are the ones that have suffered when having trade cut off from a normal trading partner. So there's fear that that might happen. There's fear among the military industrial complex that the UK might start spending a little bit less on its defense, which I was reading a piece in Foreign Policy just a little while ago. And here's a strange assumption that spending less on military, having less military, somehow makes you less secure. And of course, we would argue the opposite.
Well, but their statistics that they use to show economic strength is if you build more F-35s, that it's all part of the GDP. A worthless airplane, $1.3 trillion. Wow, it's good for the GDP. It's good for the politicians. It's good for the military-industrial complex. But it's the whole thing of what real growth is, what real wealth is, and we're doing exactly the opposite: to destroy the wealth. And Mises predicted that doing this will wipe out the middle class, and that is what it does. Anybody that has a little common sense and self-respect and sense of responsibility, they would work hard and save their money so that they can take care of themselves and not expect this government to take care of them with more fiat money. And everything they've done is to destroy that, destroy the purchasing power of their money, and also take away all their interest that they can earn. And then the people get upset. The problem, though, is what are they going to ask for? Are they going to ask for super nationalism and populism and another form of government that might even be more seductive? So a lot of the debate that's going on now is competition on what the form of big government is, rather than arguing what we need is somebody to defend the liberties of the individual and protect their interests, their life and their property and the fruits of their labor, and get out of their lives and out of their wallets. That would go a long way. And if we did the right thing, there's no sacrifice to the people. They say, oh, you have to sacrifice a lot to get out of this trouble. No, if I got my freedom back, I don't think I'd be sacrificing anything. If everybody got to keep what they earn and had the incentive to do it, and that the government wasn't going to come and spy on them and call them, oh, boy, you said something, you might be related to a terrorist, and all this nonsense that goes on, people would go back to work. But right now, we have a long way to go because too many people have become so dependent, on government, and think government's purpose is to take care of us and make us safe and secure under all conditions.
Well, I think whatever the case, this is a real seismic shift. I like what you said in your column this week. We should start exiting some things ourselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I put a little list in there, but we could expand on that list, too, and all the things that we should leave. Because, if you have your liberty, you don't have all these programs. You don't have intervention. You don't have a big government. You don't have a lot of taxes. The regulations are dealt with in the marketplace. You're not allowed to lie, steal, cheat, hurt people. Those are pretty strict rules. But no, we get the government. They get involved in lying and cheating and stealing. And that's where the problem comes. Get us involved illegally and based on lies, on wars that we shouldn't be involved in. So, no, I think if we had a concentration on personal liberty, it would be such a blessing, and there would be so much prosperity. We could be talking about peace and prosperity a lot more and enjoying it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, and RonPaulLibertyReport.com, where you can check out more articles. Go subscribe on YouTube. Now, when we're looking at a lot of these so-called consequences, some of the consequences that we're going to see are going to be basically subscribed. It's going to be retaliation. And we're going to see that. We're already seeing where they're a little afraid of what resources that they're going to lose from this. again, showing the contempt for the population of Britain, saying we don't care, what you feel about it. We wanted it. And I'm trying to. Okay, here it is. Okay. This one from dollarvigilante.com. The Dollar Vigilante. And this one's titled Next Jubilee Jolt. In wake of Brexit, the EU announces ultimatum for superstate. The UK Express, among other publications, reported that plans have been announced for an EU superstate that would blend all EU nations into an Orwellian whole. That was quick. Within 2 days, the Brexit plans were already released to rid all remaining EU nations of sovereignty. That was even quicker than the 363-page Patriot Act, which was typed up in only 7 days after 9/11. It's almost as though they already were planning for it. And of course, they were in both cases. We've been anticipating this sort of development because it will deepen tensions in Europe, which is just what the power players want. The deeper the tensions, the more angry socio-political activism becomes, yielding inevitably to violence. It is through violence and war that the state thrives. Again, order out of chaos. I've said that many of times. That is what they are pushing. That's what they're pushing here in America. That's what they're pushing in Europe. What we need is more Brexits where they can do it in a peaceful manner to get their sovereignty back. But what they're, coming out and talking about is a scheme to hold on to what they have and allow the tension to continue to brew. Back to the article here, it says, we can see the template for what is going on now in the religious splinter that occurred after Reformation. The banking guilds of the day were well aware that corrupt Roman Catholic Church was in crisis. It seems they secretly hired Martin Luther to create a formal scheme that would further weaken the church. Of course, it did end there. The unraveling went on and on, forming a broad spectrum of belief systems. Then, over several hundred years, the difference between faiths began to be blunted under the banner of ecumenical religion. This process of splintering and reabsorption is what is going on today with the European Union. Brexit has started this process, but it will not end there. The whole idea now is to tear down the nation states in the EU by pretending to consolidate their larger union, then build it up again in a different and more decentralized way that will provide little or no resistance to world government. Okay, I'm going to pause there again because this is really essential to understanding, repeating history over and over again. And through this Brexit, what Britain needs to do, which it's going to be hard, if not impossible right now, because you still have part of Britain that wants to be part of the EU. So to be able to push this through would be hard, but if you see the opportunity, it's something that would need to be done to ensure that Britain doesn't lose its sovereignty. Not only that, break it down where, you know, the members of the UK are able to have their sovereignty, and that would be to write some type of a constitution that makes it where, you know, you can't just push a annexation onto communities and the society at whole. And that's getting back to the individual and the community. And I think it would also be something where trying to forcibly keep a hold of Scotland and Ireland and things like that and um, keep them out of the EU would hurt your main goal and agenda, which is to push for the ability for the community, the nation to have their say. And when you bring that back to America, that goes back to, you know, states seceding from the United States of America. Is that something that should be allowed or not? And that goes back to, is centralized power beneficial to communities? It can be beneficial to elites that have their tentacles, you know, in all of the nation, you know, people in the military industrial complex. They like centralized power because it's easier for them. They don't have to deal with individual communities as much if those type of, whether it be law enforcement or military powers, are centralized. It's easier to deal with the National Guard if you're going through a federal bureaucracy that might have control of, you know, all the military, including National Guard. It's harder for the military industrial complex to try to deal with individual state militias because now they have to deal with every governor. So it benefits in that sense. But does it benefit the people of a community? And I think that has been exposed as a fraud. Giving more power to governments, law enforcement, and bureaucrats has not made our community safer. It has not made our communities more drug-free. It hasn't brought down tensions between races, genders, or sexuality. If anything, it continues to open old wounds for its political benefit. Sorry, my phone's been getting blown up all night, so try to turn that off there. Get back to this article here. That's just what the top powers are doing now. Angela Merkel's meeting with the European heads at the EU summit led to reports of a blueprint that would effectively strip nation states of any real sovereignty. The blueprint was so radical that it was called an ultimatum. No more armies for EU countries, no more individual criminal law, tax systems, or even central banks. All power is to reside with Brussels. This is the tearing down part that will infuriate the masses. The baiting has begun. Her idea is ludicrous, of course. Anger and unhappiness with the EU has never been higher. Numerous EU countries are now moving towards their own referendum to secede. The Express even quotes Lorenzo Codine, former Director General of Italy's Treasury, as saying further European integration at this time seems impossible. It seems difficult to imagine that the rest of the EU will close ranks and move in the direction of greater integration quickly. Simply, there is no political will. Indeed, the risk is exactly the opposite, namely the centrifugal forces that will prevail and make integration even more difficult. But of course, this is exactly the point, as we've been explaining here. Jubilee 2016 is all about creating a maximum amount of frustration, fury, and chaos. It is a building year for the planned global banking order. Once the pieces are entirely in place, the bloodletting will begin. The tribes of Europe are about to get whiplash. Soon they will see that what they believed in was little or nothing to do with what's actually taking place. They'll fight, of course, if the EU really wants to attempt to raise the rights of nation states, but it will be like the 30-year peasant war where they are increasingly fighting for a prize, disintegrating around them. Build it up, tear it down, and then rebuild it as you wish. That's what is going to happen. The outcome remains uncertain, but the steps are being taken to initiate the conflict. And just as importantly, this rolling wave of shock after shock throughout Europe will create more market chaos. And as we showed yesterday, people like frontman Alan Greenspan will be dispatched to blame all this chaos, crisis, and collapse on the fallout from the very things the globalists are initiating. They create the problem, the people and markets react, and then they offer the solution. Now, again, you can read the rest of this article at dollarvigilante.com. Next Jubilee Jolt. Now, when we've seen the markets react to the Brexit, my belief and how I've looked at it and what I've looked into it, most of it was a emotional reaction. It has no actual. We know the markets are like this. They don't actually show the economy. That's why it's really hard to even play a market that is so emotional and just reacts, not on actual issues or problems with the economy, but simply on emotion. Oh, the Britain left the EU, freak out. No actual need to freak out. Just freak out. So we look at that, but we also have to look at the fact that under the EU, your currency gets manipulated. So there was also a small portion of that market dropping, a correction for the pound. Now, of course, with the emotion on top of that, it's a extreme over correction, but there is a small part of that is a correction. It'll take a year or two for that to even balance itself out, I believe. But again, with the markets reacting on emotional reactions rather than statistical fact reaction, what we're also going to see is other countries hold referendums. And in the wake of these referendums, because it's going to take a year or two for full correction on the marketplace after the Brexit because of all the over emotional reaction, plus trying to figure in your correction in the market for the inflated currency. What we're going to see is a continual chaos in the market, which was pointed out in the article. And this has implications here in America. Now, in that article also talked about, build it up, tear it down, and then build it back the way you want it. The implications it has here in America is going to be in that emotional market, which they know what they're doing here, which can cause extreme chaos here in the United States. They know this. They've been planning on this. They already know the tensions in Europe between countries in the EU are already at a tilting point. And instead of trying to slow down by maybe trying to slow down immigration, they purposely are trying to continue this immigration to continue the chaos. And what that's going to do here in America basically will potentially leave us in a state of chaos because too many people have relied on the market. And I've been telling people, don't, put any trust in the stock market, your 401k. I said you're better off buying seeds, food, guns, bullet, gold, silver, Bitcoin, and property. That's where you should be investing your wealth. Now, if you're taking all your extra money and dumping it into your 401k, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what the markets are going to do. Our markets here are already bubbled. We got a huge bubble here. It's not popped yet. This was just the Brexit. This isn't just, what was it? A day or two after Brexit, already 5 countries are talking about holding their own referendum. Then let our bubble pop. When they talk about build it, tear it down, then build it the way you want, we know what they want. A world order. That's how they want to centralize it. They haven't been able, even through NAFTA, to completely get a North American Union. When they rebuild it, the United States will be in its own state of chaos. Therefore, it makes, whether it be a North American Union or a Western Allied Union, and maybe the United Nations will play a part in that. Have you not heard about all the UN vehicles being toted around all over America on the back of semis? MRAPs, white NRAPs with UN right there going down Virginia highways. Um, I've seen reports that there are a few people talking about they've seen them near the border. What does all this mean? It means they're getting ready for something big, and they're probably trying to continue to do this. We already have America destabilized. We got all the true extremist groups, the ones that actually call the libertarians and you know the actual extremist groups that are out there starting riots. And then you have people like Southern Poverty Law Center not calling those people extremists, but they'll call groups like We Are Change. Yeah, We Are Change is a domestic extremist organization, according to Southern Poverty Law Center. Something to that effect. But you're not going to see the actual extremists that we know are causing a lot of these riots. We tend to see members of these extremist groups popping up at the violent riots. Provocateuring. Why don't they end up on Southern? Well, because they are a socialist, communist, authoritarian, whatever you want to call them. They want to help push towards this. They like centralized control. They like power. They think power should be in the dictators, the kings, the queens type thing. But they also are the futuristic globalist type people. They watch too many movies. So I urge people to watch carefully what's going to happen. Now I have an article here from the Telegraph. How a secretive elite created the EU to build a world government. This is by Professor Alan Sked. As the debate over the forthcoming EU referendum gears up, it would be wise perhaps to remember how Britain was led into membership in the first place. It seems to me that most people have little idea why one of the victors of the Second World War would have become almost desperate to join this club. That's a shame because answering that question is key to understanding why the EU has gone so wrong. Most students seem to think that Britain was in dire economic straits and that the European Economic Community, as it was then called, provided an economic engine that would revitalize our economy. Others seem to believe that after Second World War, Britain needed to recast her geopolitical position away from empire and towards a more realistic one at the heart of Europe. Either of these arguments, however, makes any sense at all. The EEC in the 1960s and 70s was in no position to regenerate anyone's economy. It spent most of its meager resources on agriculture and fisheries and had no means or policies to generate economic growth. When growth did happen, it did not come from the EU, from Ludwig Erhard's supply side reforms in West Germany in 1948 to Thatcher's privatization and nationalized industry in the 80s. European growth came from reforms introduced by individual countries, which were copied elsewhere. EU policy has always been either irrelevant or positively detrimental, as was the case with the euro. Nor did British growth ever really lag behind Europe's. Sometimes it surged ahead. In the 1950s, Western Europe had a growth rate of 3.5%. In the 60s, it was 4.5%. But in 59, when Harold Macmillan took office, the real annual growth rate of British GDP, according to the Office of National Statistics, was almost 6%. It was again almost 6% when de Gaulle vetoed our first application to join the EEC in 1963. In 1973, when we entered the EEC, our annual national growth rate in real terms was a record 7.4%. The present chancellor would die for such figures, so the economic basket case argument doesn't work. What about geopolitics? What argument in the cold light of hindsight could have been so compelling as to make us kick our Second World War Commonwealth allies in the teeth to join a combination of Belgium and Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Germany, and Italy? Four of these countries held no international weight whatsoever. Germany was occupied and divided. France, meanwhile, had lost one colonial war in Vietnam and another in Algeria. De Gaulle had come to power to save the country from civil war. Most realists must surely have regarded these states as a bunch of losers. De Gaulle himself, a supreme realist, pointed out that Britain had democratic political institutions, world trade links, cheap food from the Commonwealth, and was a global power. Why would it want to enter the EEC? The answer is that Harold Macmillan and his closest advisors were part of an intellectual tradition that saw the salvation of the world in some form of world government based on regional federations. He was also a close acquaintance of Jean Monnet, who believed the same. It was therefore Macmillan who became the representative of the European Federalist movement in the British cabinet. In his speech in the House of Commons, he even advocated a European Coal and Steel Committee before the real thing had been announced. He later arranged for a treaty of association to be signed between the UK and the ECSC, and it was he who ensured that British representative was sent to the Brussels negotiations following the Manisa Conference, which gave birth to the EEC. In the late 1950s, he pushed negotiations concerning a European Free Trade Association towards membership of the EEC. When the General de Gaulle began to turn the EEC into a less federalist body, he took the risk of submitting a full British membership application in the hope of frustrating Gaullist ambitions. His aim, in alliance with the U.S. and European proponents of the Federalist World Order, was to frustrate the emerging Franco-German alliance, which was seen as one of French and German nationalism. Monet met secretly with Heath and Macmillan in innumerable occasions to facilitate British entry. Indeed, he was informed before the British Parliament of the terms in which the British approach to Europe would be framed. Despite advice from the Lord Chancellor, Lord Kilmer, that membership would mean the end of British parliamentary sovereignty. Macmillan deliberately misled the House of Commons and politically everyone else from Commonwealth statesmen to cabinet colleagues and the public that merely minor commercial negotiations were involved. He even tried to deceive de Gaulle that he was an anti-federalist and a close friend who would arrange for France, like Britain, to receive Polaris missiles from the Americans. De Gaulle saw completely through him and vetoed the British bid to enter. Macmillan left Edward Heath to take matters forward, and Heath, along with Douglas Hurd, arranged, according to the Monet papers, for the Tory party to become a secret corporate member of Monet's Action Committee for the United States of Europe. According to Monet's chief aide and biographer Francis Duchesne, the Labour and Liberal parties later did the same. Meanwhile, the Earl of Gosford, one of Macmillan's foreign policy ministers in the House of Lords, actually informed the House that the aim of the government's foreign policy was world government. Monet's Action Committee was also given financial backing by the CIA and the U.S. State Department. The Anglo-American establishment was now committed to the creation of the Federal United States of Europe. Today, this is still the case. Powerful international lobbies are already at work, attempting to prove that any return to democratic self-government on the part of Britain will spell doom. American officials have already been primed to state that such a Britain would be excluded from any free trade deal with the USA, and that the world needs the TTIP trade treaty, which predicated on the survival of the EU. Fortunately, Republican candidates in the USA are becoming Eurosceptics, and magazines there like the National Interest are publishing the case for Brexit. The international coalition behind Macmillan and Heath will find things a lot more difficult this time around, especially given the obvious difficulties of the Eurozone, the failure of the EU migration policy, and the lack of any coherent EU security policy. Now, do you see why our markets might have a emotional reaction to that? That's part of our creation. That's why you're seeing the correction on top of it. Now, I got a couple clips I do want to go through. Do you want to cover this other Ron Paul Liberty report real quick? A new European superstate is hardly the answer. Ron Paul Liberty report.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Ball.
Good. We've been talking a lot about Europe, but so is the whole country and the whole world's been talking about what's going on in the European Union. Understand today that Cameron will be going to Brussels to see if he's going to get a hero's welcome. And our friend Nigel Farage gave a little talk yesterday in the European Parliament, which was very interesting. He was claiming he was having the last laugh when they ridiculed him when he first started in this effort to get the British to come to their senses. But what do you think Cameron's going to do? I don't imagine he's really going to have a hero's welcome in Brussels.
No, he's having a tough time. He's there right now. He's having a tough time. His European counterparts are furious with him. How dare you allow a vote on this sort of thing? As a matter of fact, we were talking about the president of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, who said something yesterday on those lines.
Yeah, Schulz, and I think I have this written down here because it tells you about the arrogance. Most of these, Schulz is not an elected leader and this sort of thing, and they sort of take over. But Schulz, who is the president of the European Parliament, he said it is not the EU's philosophy that the crowd, that is the people, which he's referring to as a mob, can decide its fate. Only the unelected leaders. But I don't think that's brand new. Nobody should be shocked. It's just shocking to see such bluntness, such arrogance, because I think so many of the politicians I knew in Washington were rather arrogant, anyway, that they knew better and the people don't know, and that's why they had to protect the people, and that's why you have a welfare state, because nobody will take care of themselves, and we care about people, and we'll do a much better job. So, but sometimes it's just motivated by power, and I think that might be what's going on now, because they use the word superstate, or at least it came out in this report that came out in Poland, and it looks like they're not bashful about this, and they have some countries that might even want to bring this discussion up. That is, they don't want to go in the direction of Brexit. They don't want to dissolve, which seems to be the natural trend. But the big question is will this trend of trying to get out of the European Union continue, or are they going to go in the opposite direction to show how powerful they are and have the European superstate, which would be a military state as well?
Yeah, and this is, the French and German foreign ministers are presenting this idea, apparently, according to the Express in the UK, at the Visegrad 4 summit, which is Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Poland are having a summit. This is a group that's been around for a long time. Apparently, they're delivering a proposal for, as you point out, a superstate, which would, essentially merge the remaining EU with troublesome Britain out of the picture into, as you say, a sort of a unitary state. Poland, of course, resists the idea very strongly. The question, as you point out, if the trend is devolving into smaller, since the fall of the Soviet Union, devolving into smaller entities, trying to buck that trend and go the other way, it might be a fool's errand.
I don't think what we're witnessing is anything new in history, because there's always been a group that wanted world domination. You go back to the Roman Empire, the other empires existed. They wanted control of everything. So this is nothing brand new. There's always the authoritarians that know what's best. But the 20th century was filled with it, but it was filled with more violence. When you think of the really very violent nature of the Nazis and the fascists, and even the tremendous violence of the communists, and they used tanks and force and exterminations and all these kind of things. But this 21st century is a little bit different, and even this is different. They're not advocating that they should invade these countries. And it seems like some of these countries want to capitulate, and they want to be taken care of. Scotland and other people want to, I want to belong to the European Union, and maybe they'll protect me. They're almost wanting to sacrifice their sovereignty. And then there's this other element, which I think is very, very powerful too, and which is what motivated the Brexit. And that is there are people who still like sovereignty. But it's amazing how they're doing the same thing in this century, but the technique is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think the EU is using subversion and manipulation, these sort of permanent committees of experts and technocrats to govern things. It is similar to how the communists used subversion to undermine democratic political parties in Eastern Europe after World War II. It's not unlike that, but as you point out, there is a counter trend toward national sovereignty. We saw it in Hungary when Hungary rejected Merkel's call for, hey, all of the refugees, come on in, we'll take care of you. And Hungary stood up And that's one thing they would have to give up if they went along with the French-German plan.
See, I think prevailing attitudes are very important, and they are very powerful, and they have a sway. The thing of it is, it's messy, it's slow, and who speaks for the prevailing attitude? And right now, there are two attitudes, the superstate, and the attitude is, let's get our sovereignty back. But I think what is dominant, I think people went along with Hitler at the beginning, and they went along with communism at the beginning, and then finally it disintegrated. So if they could only sort it out sooner and anticipate the problem. But right now, I think we're at a crossroads on what's going to happen to Europe. Quite frankly, I don't think too many people should sit around and worrying about a military superstate in Europe. I know they want to do that, and that's a new world order, and it's different, and we can take care of everybody. Because I still think deep down in the hearts of many people, they like the idea of sovereignty, they like the idea of their own countries, and they don't like to be told what to do by somebody from Brussels and telling all these countries what to do. So all of a sudden to turn it into a military state, I may be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong on this, but I just think this movement to break it up is very, very powerful. And besides, the whole world is bankrupt. I mean, the economic system is in shambles, and that is going to dampen all this enthusiasm. Before, when there was some remaining wealth they could get away with and say, oh, okay, all we need is a superstate, and we're going to work our way out of the depression. So I don't think that's happening. But I think that there are some people who would just as soon see it happen and have it a military state in order to take care of the people.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing is a stark choice of two very contrasting ideas. On the one hand, the superstate that we talked about, and on the other hand, the Farage speech that we alluded to earlier, which it's making the rounds on the internet. I encourage people to watch it. First of all, he's always entertaining to watch, and he is doing a little gloating. He said, "You laughed at me, but you're not laughing now." But after the funny part of the speech, he made a very good point. He said, if we start, we want to pull back from the political union of the EU, but we want you to be our best friends and our best trading partners. If we start putting tariffs on each other's products, we're all going to lose. We're all going to lose jobs. German auto manufacturers will lose jobs if they put on tariffs. So his idea was, let's divorce ourselves from this political union that you're building, and let's just get along and trade and have no tariffs.
Nigel does not say, I'm a libertarian, but that's a very libertarian idea. Yeah. It's very much what the founders talked about, having no these associations and entangling alliances, but have trade and travel and get along with people. So he's on the right track. And the whole thing is can that be the prevailing idea? And people who get disgusted and say, well, he's only one person 15 years ago, you can't do anything. But it goes to show that power of ideas. And he did have an influence. And when he started, even now, he might still only not represent 51% of the world or anything, but ideas have consequences and they have powers, and you can't stop them if the time is right. And I think the whole world is ripe, because I think the failure of socialism and fascism in the 20th century was pretty clear, and even the bits and pieces are left, whether it's North Korea or whether it's Venezuela. This is total failure. And it's going to get much worse. So when there's a promise that you can have peace and prosperity with gaining one of the most valuable things you can have, and that is individual liberty and personal liberty and private property, I mean, how can they turn it down? And it'll just be who's going to have the force. So although they're talking about using force and militarizing the European Union, I'm still hopefully crossing my fingers that will not come to pass.
We do a lot of doom and gloom on the show, but there's the perfect good news message that you just delivered. This is the example of how ideas can have consequences. A little blip in the radar 20 years ago, and it explodes into a massive, monumental change.
And the old saying is that armies can't even stop ideas. Ideas go, and armies are useless. They can overwhelm. And I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing here. But those in power never go away quietly into the night, because they will cling to this power. And you can imagine, just look at what we're facing in this country today. I think the world will need to eventually get rid of all central banking. And we would be much better off with a central bank. But can you imagine how many special interests are going to argue and fight for the central bank? The world would come to an end if you didn't have central banking to print the money when we need it. Who would print the money if you didn't have the central bank? Yes, and who would provide peace and prosperity that they're not providing for us if all of a sudden we had some changes? So I think that the conditions are very ripe for the blossoming of a libertarian movement, libertarian answers, and the freedom that people, I think, deep down in their heart really seek, but they're too willing to give it up. They're too willing to sacrifice it.
All of a sudden, a number of things are at play. You know, Katrina vanden Heuvel, who is the editor of The Nation magazine and often very perceptive, particularly on foreign affairs, and she writes about the Brexit may have a silver lining for peace in Europe and for a pulling back in the confrontational attitude toward Russia. She pointed out that Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the German foreign minister, said famously last week, it made a lot of waves, that we need to stop the saber rattling and warmongering against Russia. So she is hopeful that a reassessment of relationships between the EU and the UK, their internal political relationships, may bring other things to the table, maybe reassessing this foreign policy path that they're traveling down, which is hurting businesses, hurting the average person, and putting us all at risk of a major war.
Well, don't you think we're really seeing maybe a little bit of that with Turkey, you know, and also they're moving in that direction.
Yeah, I think they you know, maybe it's a coincidence just a couple of days ago that the Turkish president said that he was sorry to Putin for shooting down the Russian plane. Before he was very, recalcitrant and stern and arrogant. And so he may see the writing on the wall is shifting and that he needs to start, making amends for some of the things that they've done.
Yeah, that is the case. But so I do think that we should lean toward optimism, but be alert. The biggest thing to overcome, though, is the propaganda of the fear-mongering. You know, how they drive fear. If you don't have the central bank, everybody's going to live in poverty forever. And if you don't have militarism and you don't have an enemy to fight, our liberties are going to be destroyed. At the same time, terrorism is a serious problem, but is that the serious problem, or is our foreign policy the serious problem? Is it our own government undermining our personal? Is that the serious problem we have? So we have to really put that in the right perspective. But we don't get much help from the ordinary media. They're not helping us and say, that's a good point. Maybe we should deal with this. Oh yeah, that's right. We need to do that. That's why we need to repeal the Second Amendment. And things like that. And you don't need due process. Get rid of due process. It clutters things up. So it is overcoming the political machine, the propaganda machine, which is always the thing that we even fought when we were in Washington when they were preparing for another war. The people at the beginning each time seemed to be, we don't need this, we don't need this. But by the time they were ready to drop the bombs, they had scared enough to be, oh yeah, they're going to kill us. Even Gaddafi, he was ready to attack us, and we had to destroy him. And look at the consequence of that. And Saddam, why did he become the monster or the enemy of the American people? He was a big problem, but us getting involved there, who benefited by this other than people who made some war profits?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's another good news story that we can bring up too, aside from that, is that, and I just did an update for the people that subscribe to the updates for the Institute, and I mentioned this, and it makes me very happy. I'm sure it would you too. Whenever something like this happens, our numbers do go up in the show. Our viewers, the number of our viewers go up, and that tells me that people are interested in what a non-mainstream perspective is. They're interested in an alternative analysis. And so hopefully that gives us some energy to keep going. I'm certainly happy to have new and more viewers, and I hope they'll all subscribe.
Yeah, I like it, especially when you get a convert. Someone will say, yeah, this is good. But I don't agree with everything you guys say.
That's okay.
But it's all right.
Yeah.
Just keep listening and just keep coming, because that to us is very important, because we do know that ideas have consequences, and armies can't stop us, and it's ripe for change. And the young people, I think, they will listen to this. I know they listened to Bernie Sanders, and he called himself a socialist. But I'll tell you what, my experience with young people is that they are open-minded enough that if you give them the opportunity to look at sound economic policy and what a non-interventionist foreign policy is, yes, they're as interested as anybody else in peace and prosperity, and that is the reason that we have to stay in this fight in order to get people convinced that we don't need war, more war and more militarism, and the Europeans don't need a powerful military state. That will not solve their problems. What we need is more liberty, more cooperation, more voluntarism, and not only should we stay out of entangling alliances, all the countries of the world should stay out of these entangling alliances. Just take care of their prime responsibility, and that is protecting and guaranteeing the liberty of their citizens. And that will go a long way. And that would mean property ownership and free trade and voluntarism. And that, I believe, is the answer to most of today's world's problems. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and please come back soon.
Again, that was Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Go check them out and subscribe. And, of course, there's articles, too, on RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Now, excuse me there. Okay. Now, we're pretty well, informed on why centralized power is not a good thing. But, I've had people ask me, I thought you're a libertarian, but now you're a nationalist. And I'm not a nationalist. It's one of those things when you go, well, if you're not a nationalist, then why wouldn't you want the borders brought down? Well, it's not about bringing borders down. It's about expanding borders for centralized power. So therefore, it's not breaking borders down. It's creating more of a fence to hold us in. It's just going, let's expand the reservation. Let's expand the control and the confinement. It's the opposite of libertarian. When you look at national sovereignty, it's a step towards away from that globalist centralized power to a more national power, which it needs to then get down to a more community state to the individual. That's the libertarian goal, and that goes along with the non-aggression principle of the libertarian philosophy, where you use persuasion over coercion. You don't use force to push your idea along or your agenda. That it has to be a voluntarily, thing where you agree to something. We can get into libertarian philosophy more. I want to find this clip. Hopefully I can find it. Give me a second. Okay. I had it right here from Peter Schiff. This was Nigel Farage in Euro Parliament on Brexit. MEPs not laughing now. And I wanted to point out one thing, though, that kind of really got me is after the Brexit vote, we had people like Nigel Farage come out, and you can find this on YouTube, but he comes out basically saying we need to trigger Article 50 now, which is to, go through the steps of actually getting out of the EU. We've had a whole bunch of people that came out right after the Brexit vote. But what did our mainstream media come out and say? Oh, the EU wants Britain out now. Blah, blah, blah. No. They're saying that after the fact to try to make it look like they don't need Britain. Again, it's all part of this, the show that they're trying to do to cause chaos. But let me go ahead and play this right here. And this is, again, Nigel Farage in Euro Parliament on Brexit. MEPs not laughing now.
The FDD group, Mr. Farage.
Good morning. Good morning. Funny, isn't it? Funny, isn't it? Thank you very much for that very warm welcome. How things have changed.
Just a second, Mr. Farage. Ladies and gentlemen, one major quality of democracy is that you listen to those, even if you don't share their opinion.
Well, thank you, Mr. Schultz. Isn't it funny? When I came here 17 years ago, and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you? And the reason you're so upset, the reason you're so angry, has been perfectly clear from all the angry exchanges this morning. You, as a political project, are in denial. You're in denial that your currency is failing. You're in denial. Well, just look at the Mediterranean. No. As a policy to impose poverty on Greece and the rest of the Mediterranean, you've done very well. And you're in denial over Mrs. Merkel's call last year for as many people as possible to cross the Mediterranean into the European Union has led to massive divisions between countries and within countries. But the biggest problem you've got, and the main reason the United Kingdom voted the way that it did, is you have, by stealth, by deception, without ever telling the truth to the British or the rest of the peoples of Europe, you have imposed upon them a political union. You've imposed upon them a political union. And when the people in 2005 in the Netherlands and France voted against that political union, when they rejected the Constitution, you simply ignored them and brought the Lisbon Treaty in through the back door. What happened last Thursday was a remarkable result. It was indeed a seismic result, not just for British politics, for European politics, but perhaps even for global politics too, because what the little people did, what the ordinary people did, what the people who have been oppressed over the last few years and seen their living standards go down, they rejected the multinationals. They rejected the merchant banks. They rejected big politics. And they said, actually, we want our country back. We want our fishing waters back. We want our borders back. We want to be an independent, self-governing, normal nation. And that is what we have done, and that is what must happen. And in doing so, we now offer a beacon of hope to Democrats across the rest of the European continent. I'll make one prediction this morning. The United Kingdom will not be the last member state to leave the European Union. So the question is, what do we do next? Now, it is up to the British government to invoke Article 50. And I have to say that I don't think we should spend too long in doing it. I totally agree, Mr. Juncker, that the British people have voted. We need to make sure that it happens. But what I would like to see is a grown-up and sensible attitude to how we negotiate a different relationship. Now I know that virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives, or worked in business, or worked in trade, or indeed ever created a job. But listen, just listen.
Herr Farage, Augenblick.
Mr. Farage, just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, I do understand that you're getting emotional, but you're acting like UKIP normally acts in this chamber, so please, don't imitate them. Mr. Farage, however, I would say one thing to you. The fact that you're claiming nobody has done a decent job in their life, you can't really say that. I'm sorry.
No, you're quite right, Mr. Schulz. UKIP used to protest against the establishment, and now the establishment protests against UKIP. So something has happened here. Let us listen to some simple, pragmatic economics. We, between your countries and my country, we do an enormous amount of business in goods and services. That trade is mutually beneficial to both of us. That trade matters. If you were to decide to cut off your noses, to spite your faces, and to reject any idea of a sensible trade deal, the consequences would be far worse for you than it would be for us. And even no deal is better for the United Kingdom than the current rotten deal that we've got. But if we were to move to a position where tariffs were reintroduced on products like motor cars, then hundreds of thousands of German workers would risk losing their jobs. So why don't we just be pragmatic, sensible, grown-up, realistic, and let's cut between us a sensible tariff-free deal, and thereafter recognise that the United Kingdom will be your friend, that we will trade with you, we will cooperate with you, we will be your best friends in the world. But do it sensibly, and allow us to go off and pursue our global ambitions and future. Thank you.
EFDD. And now on the EFDD, Mr. Farage.
The London stock market's rallying strongly this morning. It is now 12% up since its February lows. Sterling is weak, but then it started declining from July 2014. And the Prime Ministers of Australia and New Zealand are now vying for who can be the first country from outside the EU to do a trade deal with the United Kingdom. Things are looking pretty good. The only upheaval is political upheaval, where we've seen a Prime Minister resign and indeed the British Commissioner, Lord Hill, resign. They've both done so I think for the right reasons. You never know, we may be getting rid of a Labour Party leader as well. But upheavals in politics can actually be a very healthy and a very good thing. And I got into politics because our political class in Britain led us towards a European political project. So if that result last week sweeps a few of them away, so be it. But I am looking forward next year to celebrating our Independence Day on June the 23rd.
And again, that was Nigel Farage in the Euro Parliament talking about the Brexit. And you hear the boos, and you would think, well, if this country is willing to be our ally, willing to trade with us, willing to be our friends, why would they be booing? They're booing because then they don't get to help dictate the social environment within that country. Plus, they don't get a leech off of the countries that are doing better. Because, well, the governments do get to leech off of the other countries that are doing well. Doesn't mean the people within that country. Yeah, what happened to the Grexit? Why didn't Greece leave? Well, we know the people aren't into good financial, straits there. They voted to leave, but the government decided to stay. Whether it be benefits that they still get where they're able to leech off other countries, they're afraid to start at the bottom because they're at the bottom. They don't want to, leave at the bottom. Britain's in a spot where they are financially able to leave, even though they're not as good as they were when they came in because, well, they've been leached off of. Plus, a lot of these countries within their trade deals under the European Union tend to kind of have a little bit of the immigration tied to them. Which, again, I've seen an article talking about, I think it was Merkel. I can't be positive right this second. But threatening, only way to trade with the EU is for them to continue the immigration policy, basically. Why? Why to have free trade with the country, they must tear down their border? Because you don't want their sovereignty. You want to be able to manipulate the socio-political scene there. Same here in America. Again, American lobbies are a part of the EU. There's something going on here in America and in the EU. Not the same noticeability here in America. Because our states don't border, the Middle East at all. The Mediterranean. But we are still getting Syrian and, Middle Eastern refugees, which in itself isn't a bad thing. Hey, people want to come here. They want a better life. They need a better life. Okay. But they're being fast-tracked past people that have been waiting from South America. Then we're letting the illegals just pour in, even though there's been people waiting in line to do it the right way. Ours is a very large combination of immigration. A very large Middle Eastern, Burmese, you know, Hispanics. It's a very, very deep mixture. What they're getting from over in Europe is Middle Eastern and African. They're not getting the flood of Hispanics and, you know, Burmese, and they really are getting a very almost the whole percentage are, for the most part, Muslim. There, I think I've seen reports that said 5%, maybe Christian, maybe 10%, 7%. You know, I've seen multiple numbers. We can't know for sure because a lot of it's not being properly tracked. There's no venting. Them going to these European countries and living there is basically being used as a tool of venting to bring them here, even though it's not all coming from those, and they're not doing enough venting because they got too many. I think it's very, very engineered to the T what they're doing. Because I, again, have no problem with people that just want to come assimilate into a country because they see, hey, that country has possibilities. They have possibilities because of their culture and belief system. You know, it's one of those things, you know, I've known people that, you know, myself included, that moved from the South to the North. And even though I was young when I did it, I came with a strong Southern accent. Living here, I don't have that strong Southern accent. So, same when people from the North move down south, living in that culture, their you know, accent starts forming. There are people in the United States and Europe that refuse to integrate. They want to bring what they believe are the good aspects of their culture to your country and force you to go along with their culture so they won't be offended. Meaning, we will come into your home and you can't do anything that'll offend us. And in the meanwhile, we will be offending you because we're in your home, forcing you to go along with our culture. And by the way, you shouldn't be allowed to kick me out of your home because, you know, well, that's just how it should be. When you stop looking at it as bringing in a country, what would you do if you invited someone in your home and they spit on you, basically? And, you know, oh, you have a house, you don't like people walking through, you got new carpet, don't want shoes on. They just kind of like, you tell them, you know, you have to take off your shoes, and they look at you and continue to walk in your house with muddy shoes. What would you do? Now, if you invite someone in your house, You tell them, hey, take off your shoes and don't smoke in the house. They come in, they take their shoes off, they don't smoke in the house, they're polite, they, trade ideas or objects with you, you're cool. And really, that actually goes to many different cultures. The problem is we build up the parts of these cultures where the true extremists lie. And we see the media do it here. When you see protests that turn violent, that came from the left, they have anger, and it's justified anger, and this is just what you get. But when the Tea Party, even though some of it was the later Tea Party, which I don't know, I don't agree with, but even the early on Tea Party, all the way back when, it's the modern Tea Party started with Ron Paul. Even back then, peaceful, nonviolent. Back when the modern Tea Party, kicked off with Ron Paul, it was the revolution with the love-olution, the whole revolution emblem, the famous revolution with the love part highlighted in red. It was peaceful, but how did the media portray that peaceful group? Racists, bigots, hate groups, extremists. But when we actually have that, they're just angry people that are justified in their anger and their response. No. They are not persuading people. They are using coercion and violence to push their agenda. That's an extremist. It's not defending one's freedom, their rights. Because it's the opposite. It was abusing others and taking away their rights. When they burn down businesses, when they burn down, their community, there's no justice in that. And honestly, there's a true lack of respect for themselves and their community. Now, if I can get to this clip fast enough, I'll play it. Okay. I'm going to end this broadcast with one more Nigel Farage on Brexit and Donald Trump. This was a CNN interview. Before I get to this, though, I want everybody, don't forget to go to ucy.tv. There is a UCY support tab at the top. You click that, and you can donate to UCY to keep this broadcast network on the air. And don't forget, there's also Amazon tab down at the bottom. If you click that little button, Amazon button, it'll take you to Amazon. And when you shop through Amazon, UCY has partnered with them, and they get a little kickback. You get the same great prices, same great shipping rates, and at the same time, again, UCY gets a little kickback. And when I tell people to prepare, I got two companies that I deal with, and they have always done me right, always provided me with high quality stuff. One is My Patriot Supply. This is where I get my non-GMO seeds, all certified, and water filtration. So I would urge people in this time where we're seeing all these puzzle pieces being laid, to try to prepare and do what you can to protect you and your family. Go to My Patriot Supply. If you go to antityrannynews.com/mypatriot, it'll take you straight to My Patriot Supply, and that'll help cover broadcasts here from our end at antityrannynews.com. And if you also want to dip into a little precious metals, which I definitely like, not where I put all my eggs, but I definitely like it. Go to antityrannynews.com/metal, and that'll take you to Amagi Metal. Really great customer service, great prices, and again, it's a source that I personally trust. So again, antityrannynews.com/metal and /mypatriot for My Patriot Supply. And don't forget UCY.tv. Let's get into this. This is another Nigel Farage against CNN interview. Let's go ahead and get into this.
If David Cameron is to some extent the official player on behalf of the United Kingdom in the dinners and meetings, Nigel Farage is probably the unofficial leader in that sense, because he was the unofficial leader within a large part of the Brexit campaign. We've already heard your speech, your part of it, in Parliament this morning. You were almost gratuitously rude to the parliamentarians, and you enjoyed it.
Now look, they were abusing me from the moment I started. Twice the President of the Parliament had to cease proceedings and say, please listen to Mr Farage. Then when I said to them, can we be grown up about this? Can we talk about trade deals? And then they all laughed and giggled. That was when I said to them, well, of course, the trouble with you people is none of you have ever had a proper job, which wasn't wrong.
But the point is, Mr Farage, it hardly endears you to the very people who are going to have to give their consent to an agreement in 2 years' time if you are rude to them.
Well, they called me all the names under the sun. I just teased them about the fact they're a bunch, basically, of bureaucrats who've never had a proper job. Look, forget that.
You don't like them?
They don't like me. It's mutual.
And you haven't liked them for how many years?
Well, all 17 that I've been here. Look, what they've tried to do is to build a political union without consent. And I've been in there to fight against it. And finally, a member state of this union has said, we wish to succeed. And they didn't like it much.
So, our viewers in the United States who are watching now and wondering what on earth is going to happen to Britain, how can Britain thrive, I didn't say survive, I say thrive, outside the European Union when the banks have been decimated in the share price and the threats have been very severe?
You know, yesterday...
And the pound has fallen 13, 14%.
Yeah. And FTSE's up 3% today, 12% up since its lows in February. Sterling is marginally lower than it was in February. So can we stop this nonsense about the markets? You know, the pound has been in a bear market since July 2014. Fact. Now, American viewers, imagine if NAFTA was a political union. Imagine if a court in Mexico could overrule anything that Congress did. Imagine if you had free movement of people with Mexico. How would you feel? You wouldn't like it. And what we're doing in the UK, we're reasserting our democratic rights. And in terms of business and trade, we'll go on trading.
You are starting to sound, in some way, with the similar policies to Donald Trump. Now, he admires the Brexit result. He said it was fantastic, it was brilliant. Do you admire Donald Trump in this US presidential election?
Well, Donald Trump dares to talk about things that other people want to brush under the carpet. But what Mr. Trump is doing in America is very different to what I'm trying to do in the United Kingdom. My problem in politics is far greater than Donald Trump's. We literally have lost our sovereignty, lost our borders, lost our ability to regulate.
He would say the same thing about US borders.
Well, the problem that you've got in the US is illegal immigration. Our problem is legal immigration to 500 million people.
So you wouldn't be looking to him for too much support, because on the one hand, he also says if he becomes president of the United States, Barack Obama's going to the back of the trade queue wouldn't happen. You'd be at the front of the queue. So in many ways, you must hope he becomes president.
Well, I think for the United Kingdom, I think Trump would be better for us than Barack Obama's been, if that was no doubt.
And against Hillary Clinton, or are you not going to take sides at this early stage?
There's nothing on earth could persuade me ever to vote for Hillary Clinton.
You're sure you don't want to think about that for a second?
No, absolutely not.
I mean,
I mean, she represents the political elite. It's almost as if she feels she has a sort of divine right to have that job.
You keep talking about the political elite. You keep talking about the establishment. Sir, you're part of it. Well, you've been here for 17 years.
Yeah, but I came into it from business. I used to trade commodities and currencies.
So
I had a proper job once.
How on earth do you have the effrontery to criticise Wall Street, the banks, you criticise big business when you were part of those markets?
Well, yeah, but the markets aren't just dominated by big business. Good markets have small and medium-sized competitors trading in them too. And look, you know, the actions of Goldman Sachs in cahoots with this European Commission, getting Greece into the euro and everything else, we need change.
All right, you've got your change, you've got your referendum, you've got to agree that the UK at the moment, the Labour Party has imploded with Jeremy Corbyn has lost, the opposition party that is, has lost the vote of confidence. The Prime Minister has resigned. You've got leadership elections in two parties. This is sending a terrible message about what's happening in Britain to the rest of the world.
It's a great message.
How can you say that, sir?
It's a great message. Our political class have led us down like a cheap pair of braces, and what we did last week in that referendum was say, get thee gone. Political change will be a good, healthy, constructive change.
How much damage are you prepared to see? Because the Chancellor now accepts that there will be a recession. He said so on BBC Radio this morning. He accepts that there was going to be economic damage. How much damage are you prepared to accept before you rebuild the house?
Do you know something?
Getting rid of the scrap is damage?
Independence,
Hold on.
democracy, not being a slave to somebody else is something upon which you can't put a price.
Notice how they try to say breaking down the establishment is damage. Well, it's damage to the establishment. That's okay.
What we did last Thursday is we voted to take back our country, to take back our laws, our courts, our borders, our pride and self-respect. And you know what? Actually, I think in trade terms, we're going to do better than we did before. Right. Just last night, the Australian and New Zealand Prime Minister said they want to come to the front of the queue for a trade deal with Britain.
Now, let's just look at our European partners. Angela Merkel sounds as if she's, pardon the pun, angling to do a deal, or at least there's a deal. But they won't allow informal negotiations without Article 50 being invoked. And that's not going to be invoked. This is the article when the time limit begins. So when would you like to see it invoked?
I feel now that there is a logic that says that there is a degree of uncertainty as to where we're going with all of this, and it doesn't make sense to wait till the autumn. I think what the government needs to do is to put a negotiating team in place and to declare Article 50, to invoke it within the next few weeks.
I'm going to stop it there. We are at the end of the broadcast. Again, don't forget to go to ucy.tv. Either click that support tab and donate, or again, you can shop through Amazon. If you click the Amazon button towards the bottom of ucy.tv, you'll help, keep the broadcast on the air. We need alternative media because mainstream media is not going to tell you the whole truth and not bring you the side that goes against the establishment's push for power and control. And taking away sovereignty of not only the individual, but even the countries themselves to initiate a world control and power. Again, thank you all for tuning in tonight. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv for all the great broadcasts coming up after this.
This is JJ